Welcome back to TrueNAS Tech Talk. Today we're going to be talking about backup systems. It was just World Backup Day, so this is a great time to think about how you can protect all of your data from the nastiness out there in the world. We'll be talking about the concept of air gaps, virtual air gaps, replication, and more than just 3-2-1 for your backups. Stick around.
Welcome back, TrueNAS Tech Talk. We were off for a week or two there. Glad to be back. It's about time. But before we get into today's episode, we got some good stuff to talk about. As usual, do all the YouTube things, like, subscribe, ring the bell. You've heard it all before, but please go do that. Otherwise, I might be forced to do something exceptionally cruel and make Kris turn DLSS 5 on for all of his games going forward. And I don't know, that sounds pretty mean, Kris.
Oh, come on. You're going to yassify all of my games, even Slay the Spire?
No, it's great. This is modern technology at its finest. This is great.
Oh, Lord. No. Yeah. Well, you know what I'm going to do? That's going to be the push that'll get me to join that apparently 5% plus of users in Steam that are running Linux now, and because DLSS 5 won't work there. So maybe that'll be the solve.
That's still really impressive. I know 5% sounds small, but I mean, that's still a big number. I say 10% is the next milestone. We'll be keeping an eye on it. But I mean, my Ubuntu gaming system works great, although I don't play many games on it these days. Now I'm using it for like OpenClaw setups and stuff, Kris. So it's moved on to more interesting projects for me. But speaking of some interesting tech news, we should mention before we get into the bulk of today's episode. So we had talked in previous episodes about TrueNAS 26. Beta 1 is coming out next week, so keep an eye out for that. Coming soon. We'll be eager to talk about that post-launch. But yeah, that's happening here pretty quick. So we'll be looking forward to hearing your feedback on that soon. But today we have a little bit of a different topic. We're going to get into some strategy and technical architecture around virtual air-gapped backup systems. What does that really mean? What's kind of marketing, fact versus fiction? And then a little bit of a how-to on how to do this well with TrueNAS, how to use pull replications, how to lock down a backup host, basically setting up TrueNAS appliances which are hardened for remote attackers. So all good stuff. So Kris, why don't you take us off with this and let's get into it.
Absolutely. It's a very good time for this as well because we just had World Backup Day there on March 31st. That's a time where if you don't have a backup, it's a good time to start thinking about it. If you do have one, it's a great time to check it. And as always, all of our listeners probably know this, but RAID, even if it's ZFS, is not a backup. So try to have some additional backups just to protect that data that's most valuable to you. So the idea is that, backups are great. But again, we mentioned about testing them because a backup that you can't restore from isn't really worth much at all. Or you may have backups and you think they're safe, but one of the most common ways people are losing their data right now is they think about, there's a ransomware attack and they're encrypting all my files. And what will I do? Well, I'll just restore from a backup. That worked pretty well in the early days, but modern ransomware isn't just encrypting your files anymore. They're actually actively hunting for and trying to destroy your backup shots before they do their actual payload of encrypting your active files. So they're trying to clean up and prevent you from doing those restores in the first place. So the challenge with this is you could say, well, I have a backup, but if it is on the same network segment, if it's reachable from your primary, if you've got two systems doing replication, and if they manage to breach your primary system through a matter of patience and waiting, maybe they've got a keylogger in place that they're trying to capture your administrator's credentials. And then if that backup system is reachable from the primary, if they own your primary system, they'll own your replicated backup as well. And that's particularly dangerous, especially if you're using what's called push-based replication. That means the primary system has those credentials to push the backup data into your secondary. So your attacker, when he gets access to your primary, he's going to inherit your write access. Even a cloud backup is vulnerable to this. If you have an always-on set of credentials that's mounted, if you have persistent mount points that are going on, they're kind of vulnerable to that same attack. So that's really the question, Kris, is if you have two systems that are both reachable from a client endpoint and fully reachable from each other, do you actually have two separate systems, or do you have kind of, two of them side by side sharing a blast radius or, area of effect?
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. And I hope we're not scaring too many people about this, but these are the things, if you're a sysadmin and you're in charge of taking care of data and data integrity and all that, this is important to think about. So what do products do in this? So typically we'll hear terms thrown out there like virtual air gap. That's kind of my favorite one. I love when people put the word virtual in front of things, and that immediately makes my marketing radar go off. Like, okay, what do they actually mean? So in all honesty, yes, there's a lot of products who will say, yes, we will do virtual air gaps. And then they'll market it as it's a premium SKU or a premium feature. It's part of our product. But what they're actually describing is just proper network isolation plus immutable snapshots and, importantly, one-directional data flow. Not that any of that usually requires any kind of special product. It just requires correct architecture and the foresight to set it up properly. So again, the word virtual here is really doing a lot of the heavy lifting. A true air gap means there's no network connection at all. That's what an air gap is. It's unplugged. It's not accessible to any outside would-be bad attackers. So a virtual air gap, of course, means there is a network path, but it's controlled in such a way that the attacker can't traverse it, even if they do manage to get compromised credentials and gain access to your primary, which, again, that's their goal. If they're a ransomware attacker, they want to force you to pay the ransom. So they're going to do everything they can to not only encrypt your data, but destroy any hope you have of recovering it outside of, sending Bitcoins to this address. So all that to say, with TrueNAS, we're kind of cutting through a little bit of the marketing fog here and a little bit of the BS that we see out in the world. We're going to talk to you here about how you can build this yourselves. TrueNAS has all the primitives to build this yourselves. And full transparency, it's not really a black box how this works. It just takes a little time and forethought and good operational practices to give you that equivalent virtual air gap functionality. So let's get a little bit through some of this on the architecture side, Kris. And again, you mentioned a little bit in your intro, but what does this really look like from a practical, how I'm engineering my solution standpoint?
Absolutely. The first key point that you do need, of course, is you do need two physically separate TrueNAS systems. You could say, well, what if I have, two virtual instances on the same machine? Well, then you have kind of the same machine as your point of failure there. And hey, maybe the root credentials of that virtual host end up being the thing that gets compromised. Not ideal. I'll
point out real quick, too, we hear about all these compromises, Kris, about people breaking out of VM isolation as well. So I'm pretty skeptical. Like I said, I wouldn't trust that at all.
Yeah, two bare metal machines are ideal. Put them on a physically separate location, a separate network, something where you have probably the best ideas, some, different network subnets and an actual bit of routing and some firewalling in between. You don't necessarily need to do a there and back again round loop out to a WAN or across a WAN, but you need to have some manner of that network segmentation. The next thing you'll want to do is set up some rules on your backup target. So your secondary machine, you're basically going to want to tell it to be incredibly paranoid and block all inbound traffic except from the specific address that you expect to do the management of that system from. Whether you have a separate, a jump host that is two-factor secured, you can also, of course, two-factor secure the login to the backup box itself. But you want to basically make it a completely dark system to the rest of your network. Say, hey, you don't know about any kind of IP addresses, only, these ones that I'm going to specify to you to respond to. Everything else, if it tries to even ping it or reach out to it, it just gets a black hole. And you make that a two-way rule. So if your backup system somehow tries to reach out to the wrong thing, if there's a misentry or a misroute in the network, it just says, well, I don't know anything other than, this particular address. I have a very limited scope. It's like the old, the cave paintings on the wall projected by light. That's its reality, and that's what it needs to see. The next piece that's kind of the critical inversion of the thought process is to switch yourself to a pull-style replication. So rather than your primary system deciding, oh, I'm going to take my data and I'm going to push it out to my backup, you flip that on its head and you say, the backup system, with its limited knowledge of what exists, is going to reach out to the primary system, grab those snapshots, and then close the connection. So your primary system has no credentials and no real way to make access to your backup. You don't really set up you don't set up an SSH tunnel that's two-way in that sense. You don't allow it to initiate the outbound connection. You say, hey, my backup box is the one that's in control here. It's locked down, it's hardened, and it's only doing what it needs to, which is just periodically reaches out, says, are there any new snapshots over here? All right, I'll grab these, bring them back on site, and then I'm closing down again. One of the last
Yeah.
things you can do is lock down your permissions as well. So the replication key that you set up for SSH, you can set it up only to have read access on that primary side to say, hey, I only need to be able to read from my, my source backup. So that way, if somehow somebody manages to get into your secondary system first, they can't try to say, well, let's use this as a destructive path into the primaries. You're basically letting each system only manage its own house and say, there's very limited things they can do. Obviously, don't change, don't set your same password on both of them. Don't use the same, rolling authentication token, things like that. But that's your key architectural pieces. It's about having those two systems and being fully aware of what they can each see and which direction that connection is initiated from.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So we got some additional things we should throw out, kind of a hardening checklist. Again, these are all important things because you can do all that, but there's a lot of other steps you don't want to miss along the way. So as Kris mentioned, again, you want to disable the backup systems, API, web interface, all of that to a management VLAN only, or potentially one literal management client, which is also itself locked down. It can only reach the TrueNAS management interface, or maybe that's not even online all the time. Once you set it up, you take that offline. Change the default replication user. If you can avoid using root, absolutely always do that. Of course, alerting is critical. What's the use of having all this if alerts aren't firing and you're not getting notified when the attack's happening? So again, if a ransomware attack's trying to sever the replication or it's deleting snapshots on your primary, you want to make sure your backup system is set up to send alerts out so you'll get the notice, hey, my pull replication failed because it doesn't have similar snapshot origins. In other words, somebody's done something funky on the primary and tried to destroy your good copies. We want to make sure your backup system can still reach outbound and has an alert mechanism, which will let you know you should take a look. Something's going on here. Another thing, and I can't stress this enough, you always have to test restores, not just backups. I mean, it's cool. I love seeing backup successful. That's awesome. We all want to see that. But you need to periodically pull a data set from the backup and verify it because, again, a backup you've never tested is just a hypothesis. It's not a guarantee. And I used to work at a backup company long before my TrueNAS days. And we always had the joke, which is an old industry standard, about there's two types of people in the world: those who have lost data and those who will lose data, right? So again, it's until you really get out there and test it, you don't really know for sure. And you don't want to find out the hard way after the attacks happen. Oh, my backup wasn't good. Again, Kris, you already mentioned it, but we can't stress this enough. Separate management credentials. Don't use the same password on the backup system. Like, please, guys, come on. Store the password offline. I would stress use two-factor authentication. Like, you can do some extra things to extra harden that backup system. TrueNAS has all those capabilities. They're all baked in. Look it up. It's in the docs or in the UI. You can just search for it. Take advantage of those. Again, we give you all the tools, but you have to make use of them. And of course, ZFS snapshot immutability windows. You can also change some of the retention policies on the backup side. So for example, you keep longer period of snapshot retention on the backup than maybe the primary does. A lot of times your primary is churning through data more often. And so you might have a shorter window. Say you're only retaining 2 weeks worth of daily snapshots on the primary. Well, cool. Maybe go to a month of snapshots on the backup system. Make sure it's provisioned appropriately so you can handle that extra workload. That's important, though. It's always good to have that extra longevity of the snapshots on the backup system.
Yeah. And sometimes it's just sort of a natural thing that happens because maybe your primary system is, a smaller set of all flash or something like that that's tuned for performance and delivering you some capacity there. But your backup, you say, well, I've put a bunch of spinning disks in there. I don't necessarily need the same performance, but I just want a lot of space. So combined with, the natural copy on write nature of the snapshots and the space reduction that you get from that, you shove it over to your snapshot or your replication machine, and you can say, I can keep snapshots longer. Maybe I can, let them sit there for a month, 2 months, but realistically, you say that they only need to live for a week or two on my primary, and then I send them over to that secondary system.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And even the way I've done like my own cloud backups, Kris, where it's the backup system that's actually initiating the cloud sync out to the cloud as opposed to the primary. So it's like I have a chain, and it makes it harder and harder, to get through all the layers.
Exactly. Well, hey, that's a great time to segue into the idea of your tiered backups. And everybody's heard about the classic 3-2-1 rule of backups, where you say you want 3 copies of your data, you want to use 2 different medias, and you want one of those copies to be off-site. So there's actually been a bit of a refresh and a modern sort of extension to that, where you not only have your 3-2-1, but they also tack an extra 1 and a 0 on the end. So the extra 1 on the end for your 3-2-1-1 is 1 copy that is either air-gapped or kept completely offline. Now, some people might say, well, a set of tapes might satisfy for this, and that's true, but you can also have that be, a cloud copy through an air gap. You can have it be your replication copy of a second system through this lockdown architecture with TrueNAS. And then finally, that 0 means something that we've said several times. It means 0 errors on restore. Certainly, you can say, I have all this data, but if you can't restore it, or you restore it and it comes back with errors, well, then it's not nearly as valuable. So the modern extension of that is 3-2-1-1-0.
So I was going to say, Kris, at one point when I had a little bit more paranoia about my data, I did have that offline copy. And the way I did it was I had a shelf with just a SAS cable. And I would plug it in periodically, do the replication, all that, and then export that pool. It was its own pool, and it stays offline. So it's physically disconnected, but sitting there, because I didn't want tape. I'm not a big fan of tape.
Well, we do have a couple community users that I think will actually send some of their most critical data to tape offsite, but we also have a fair number who do something not dissimilar to that, but they actually do scheduled wake and sleep of one of their replication systems, where they say, I'm going to wake it up at this time with a magic packet, wake on LAN. It wakes up, it does its pull replication, and then it goes back to sleep and stays there for the rest of the week. So it wakes up, it does its job, it goes back to bed, saves them some power, and keeps them a little bit safer with one of those offline copies.
That's cool.
So the best part is with TrueNAS, of course, you can build this entire stack of that 3-2-1-1-0. You can start with the first chain of having your local snapshots through ZFS and TrueNAS. You can then do your replication to your on-site backup, your second copy, with that sort of virtual air gap that you've constructed using all of those building blocks that are completely within TrueNAS and totally free to use. Then you can do a cloud sync job, whether you want to use a cloud storage provider. You can use one of the other ones out there. There's quite a number of them. Some of them offer native ZFS sync capabilities, but those are a little bit more pricey than the others. So you could just do a simple file-based or object-based sync up to a cloud provider. But basically what you have there is you now have, your 3 copies. You've got your 2 different medias. And if you want to count, maybe the 2 systems and a cloud, you have 3 different medias. You've got 1 offsite. And with the virtual air gap that you've generated, you've got a bit of that additional bonus. You've got something that's faster to restore from than the cloud, definitely less costly if you have a cloud provider that offers large egress fees if you're pulling data back. It's more resilient than just a regularly connected replica with that full access. So that's what we're providing here, is the idea of, the same strength that would normally require like a heavy enterprise vendor contract, a lot of premium SKUs, and support requirements. We're providing this with full visibility into every layer of this backup, including your immutability.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, remember, as we kind of close this segment off, the competitors out there selling you a virtual air gap as a feature are really just charging you for good architecture. TrueNAS gives you all the architecture, pull replications, snapshot retention control, all your network lockdown, isolation. You can build all this. It's all there for the asking. And the best backup system isn't the most expensive one. It's just the one the attacker can't reach. So keep that in mind as you're planning your next backup strategy.
Exactly. Well, I hope everybody had a productive World Backup Day. And again, take a look at what you're doing and maybe say, this is a good opportunity for me to improve it. But hey, let's jump into a couple of viewer questions here, Kris, just to close things up. We've had a good conversation there, but let's jump into a couple here. Not too many. We had a few questions here. So we got one coming in from Shoulders off our forums where he says, with all the work you guys have done, with virtualization on TrueNAS, when will the VM GUI get an upgrade? He says, I feel it's been lacking for so many years. You've done a lot of work with the other aspects of TrueNAS, improving the way things work, but the VM GUI seems to be sort of sitting behind. So what's going on with that, Kris?
You're not wrong, Shoulders. It does still look pretty much the same as it has for the last few years. I mean, the real answer is we'll get to it when we get to it. It's functional right now, but you're right. It could use a bit of a UX overhaul and refresh. 26 was mostly focused on getting the containers section cleaned up and out of experimental status, as well as some of the other kind of quality of life improvements we did, which touched the whole user experience. For example, go back and look at the episode on the context-aware alerting we did to try and make it easier to troubleshoot and solve problems. Those are a bit more important than going and refactoring the UX for the VM sections specifically. But it definitely, I agree, it could use some new designs for sure. Won't be in 26, maybe in 27. We're just now getting started with the development efforts on that side. But again, we're trying to, we rank things as effort versus impact as we take a look at all these. And so sometimes it makes more sense to focus on ones that have broader impact across the whole user experience in the GUI versus just we're going to do that one small section, especially if not everyone's running VMs on TrueNAS. So we got to look for bang for buck. But it is on my wish list as well. I feel you. It definitely is due for some new paint.
Yeah, maybe a little bit of polish there for sure, but that's a good one. So we've got yet another Kris question coming in here from Chris Parkin, who actually reached out to us over email. He says, "Hey guys, I love the show." And says, I was nervous when you announced the launch of Scale, now Community Edition, as it felt like it was only a matter of time before Core went away. Having used Scale on some newer systems and also keeping some Core ones running, after 18 months, he says, the world didn't exactly come to an end for me. But with that said, it would be helpful to have an idea of when Core support will officially end. I know you're no longer actively developing against it, but you do, of course, have some enterprise customers running it. So you must have some idea of when the support will end, and maybe they can share that with us here in the community.
No, thanks for asking, Kris. You're correct. Of course, we're no longer actively developing the Core line. I mean, we don't even really talk in terms of Core and Scale anymore. It's all Enterprise and Community Edition. And indeed, we're only really supporting that Core line for enterprise customers at this stage. Now, luckily, the security issues that have come out as of late have been mitigated pretty well, and we don't expect to have to do any more security updates against that legacy branch of the software. I'm going to knock on wood here. You can't see me. I'm doing that. We'll see. But for the ultra security conscious folks, especially those who say, oh, well, I want to be able to go run my Nessus and make sure all my packages are reporting as green and all that good stuff. Like really the path is to go upgrade to Scale now, which is of course Community Edition or Enterprise. That's what you want to be on if you're always on the latest versions of the individual components that make up the base firmware images. And then with the arrival of the 26 LTS for enterprise customers in this coming year, that's probably going to be the prime time opportunity for any remaining Core systems that are struggling to make the jump to TrueNAS 26, especially if you're on the enterprise side and will have access to that long-term supported version. That's really kind of the moment you need to be thinking about, how am I going to upgrade here in the near future?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's a pretty fair answer. I mean, it's one of those things that we have said for a bit, is that we are, doing the active development into Scale. That's where like the new features, the new excitement is. And so yeah, if you're looking for the latest patches for everything, then definitely time to jump to, one of our newer releases, whether, you're in 2504 or 2510, or you're eagerly anticipating the drop of TrueNAS 26 coming fairly shortly. I know I've been running the nightlies and the master releases myself for some time, Kris, and I'm going to be excited to put some systems onto 26 beta and, poke around and see all the improvements, sort of gel together.
Using it with my MCP here to control it. It's fun. It's great. There's a lot of good new features in there. I've already found some cool use cases for the LXC containers. Again, I'm doing some OpenClaw things around the house these days. So there's just a lot of good stuff there. It's an exciting time to be in the industry.
Yeah, and I did see that somebody on Reddit has generated their own individual MCP for TrueNAS as well. And I mean, hey, that's amazing. Like we welcome. Cool. We welcome all this kind of innovation, and that's great. Again, just be very careful on what you're exposing through the MCP, and you could do your API permissions and say, hey, let's let it have very limited access. And I saw you said you require absolute explicit confirmation for anything. Again, all that kind of thing is fantastic. We love that. We encourage that kind of innovation, and outside the box thinking of like, let's make it where you're in the Star Trek future of, hey, computer, replicate that snapshot for me.
I love that. Again, the voice control and just natural language for being able to do tasks. Hey, go create an SMB share. Do you want to make a data set? What kind of setup do you want for that? Or I want to go deploy this app. I'm not sure which app to use. And it searches the catalog. Here's the ones that might satisfy this requirement. Cool, deploy that. And it kind of just verbally walks you through deployment. It's really nice. Again, if you haven't tried it, you probably should. It's cool. I think that is the way of the future. But, it's early days, but I can see the potential. It's coming.
That's awesome. Well, just a quick reminder here before we wrap up. Again, we had a little bit of some sporadic episodes in the last while Kris was traveling. We're unfortunately going to be doing some busy travel in the months coming up ahead. We're on sort of the spring trade show circuit as it is now. As we mentioned, we're both going to be at the National Association of Broadcasters show. Again, pop in and see us if you're going to be in the Las Vegas area there in April. We're going to be at booth 1111 in the North Hall. As mentioned, we got a couple other conferences, but we will do our best to make sure we are bringing you some news and some information on TrueNAS every week. Hey, maybe we'll even do a little bit of a short broadcast or some live reels right from the show floor there, Kris, if we're allowed to.
Yeah,
we'll see. We'll see how the bandwidth is. There's, there's about 70,000.
That's usually challenging. We'll see.
That always is the challenge. I think there's about 60 to 70,000 people on a given year show up at NAB, so the spectrum is a little crowded, and sometimes the bandwidth is not the greatest for anything real time. Unless we're going to bring in our own truck and handle that with like a satellite uplink, we might not be able to pull that off. But hey, we'll give it a shot. We'll try to report in for you. So again, thanks everybody for tuning in. We apologize for some of the sporadicness, and we'll try to be here for more and more in the future. Again, please do those usual YouTube things for us. Give us the like and the subscribe. I don't really want to have to put that filter on every single game I play, and I imagine it would just look awful in VR. I can't do that. Come on, guys. So if you do have any further questions, again, please send them in to t3@truenas.com. Drop them in the comments below. Reach out to us over social media. We do read all your comments, even if we don't get a chance to respond to every one of them. Thank you again for tuning in, and Kris and I will see you next time.